Hello, everyone. I'm John O'Loughlin. Welcome to McDuff Lives. And I'm happy to bring back to our show tonight David Cranmer Underdown for another edition of McDuff and Underdown, a show I've enjoyed doing over the past couple of years now, as often as we can. So here we go. Welcome back, David.
Well, thanks for having me back. I'm glad to be here as always.
Well, one of the things I think we should touch on is the passing of Henry Kissinger. I've seen a few comments by you or from folks on Twitter, or now known as X at all. But I'm curious to see, just kind of off the top of your head, what are the big takeaways from our studies of Henry Kissinger's life and his effect on our country?
Well, I think that he certainly had a big effect on our country, and for me, I'm always trying to look at the networks that who his mentors were, who he's mentored, which people in place currently have studied under him or been his students. So it's he does he's especially in the areas that we talk about, was as far as military intelligence and diplomacy and foreign relations. I mean, he's been in the middle of that stuff since, I mean, from my perspective, since he was the translator for Allen Dulles in 1946. I mean, he would have been in the room, discussing the reconstruction of Europe after World War II, and then from that point on, having a close relationship with the Rockefeller family. Then he, goes into more of a public diplomatic role as the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State under Nixon and Ford. And then, from that point, it just seems like he's influenced a lot of the diplomats that have shaped the course of our country over the going back almost 70 years.
Yeah, and a lot of bad stuff has happened along the way, and that's where I think people are not holding back in wishing he were perhaps burning in hell, for instance. Some people would say, and I can't say it would be undeserved, but his ability to run this kind of crazy balance of power thing. Uh, and I think, it comes from the financial powers, the consolidated financial powers that, old Europe and then the Wall Street, Atlantic, uh, City of London group are financing the the programs that he does, and he has the ability, or had the ability, to do things like arrange the assassination of foreign leaders, Salvador Allende, for instance, and there's so many other horrible things that are ascribed to him, such as the Cambodia massacres and uh, all of these other things. But history may just be kind to him; they may let him go. But to me, he has been the agent of horrible, horrible uh, policies. When our country was the strongest country in the world after World War II, and it's been largely through his efforts that the Soviet Union grew to be at least arguably as powerful to sustain the mutually assured destruction mantra that everyone was saying, which it enables all of these border wars all around the world that are going on right now, like in Ukraine, and the sad warfare in Israel and Palestine. All of these things are part of Henry Kissinger's overall plan. And I think what it really is leading to is world government. Would you not agree?
I mean, I think that's correct. Part of the thing that makes him such an interesting character for me to study, and I think for anyone, is that his we talk about public and private partnerships with governmental agencies and corporations, but I feel like he really had that going as well with as far as his partnership. So I do think that his strategies were as you said, strategy of tension, balance of power, the domino theory. But I think what his real legacy is that you talked about the assassinations, but I feel like his ability to use poison warfare and to victim blame people. To me, that's what really stands out. And it's just nobody wants to be the person that uses chemical and biological weapons, but he seems like he was the fulcrum point for handling those materials during his career. And I think that's the to me that's his legacy, is that he's capable of using unethical and underhanded tactics to get the desired results for the financial institutions and banking institutions that he worked for so many years.
All right, underhanded and yeah, just really black flag warfare is that's what we have, quote, special forces for, to do the things that save the lives of the troops by just taking care of business in a stealthy way that's usually not very pretty. Um, well, a number of other things you've been covering this week. I enjoy watching you on Twitter. Uh, you picked up on a person that George Webb identified earlier in the week, and I did too. I thought it was interesting to follow Jack. Uh, what is his first name? Crichton.
Oh, Jack Crichton. Yeah.
Jack Crichton. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Tell us about him.
Yeah, he's a fascinating character. The reason that I mean, I've looked at him for a long time because he's right in the middle of the JFK assassination, but he's a name that I feel like never comes up, and I think somebody that people should study. I mean, he was he was in the oil. Oh, are we still there?
Yeah, you're
Um,
back.
okay, he worked for all the when people study the JFK and they talk about the Texas oil men and these interests with the petroleum buyers clubs and things like that. He was in the middle of all those deals. I mean, he was working with um, George de Mohrenschildt, who's a character that a lot of people are interested in. He was doing offshore oil lease deals with Bautista in Cuba before Castro came into place. He worked with Bill Buckley, William Buckley's dad. He was with Prescott Bush, Clint Murchison, Sid Richardson. H.L. Hunt. Like, you can go down the whole list of all the oil men. He was right in the mix. But the reason why he stands out is for a couple of reasons. One, he was a college roommate of Earl Cabal at Texas A&M, and for Earl Cabal he was the mayor of Dallas when JFK was killed in '63. But his brother is Charles Cabal, who I've talked a lot about because he was the person that went with Bissell to Germany in 1953 to negotiate to have a U-2 base set up in Germany. And they negotiated with Konrad Adenauer, who was the same person that was negotiating the Holocaust reparations with Natum Goldman, who was the founder of the World Jewish Congress. So there's a lot of overlapping characters. But the other thing with Crichton that's important is that he had a role with this 488. It was a private intelligence unit that he ran that was made up of a lot of local Dallas police officers, but it had an aviation unit, which was always interesting to me because of the connection with David Harold Bird, Dryhold Bird, who was the another one of the oil men. He owned the school book depository, but he also was one of the founders of the Civil Air Patrol. And the Civil Air Patrol was the group that was designed to train, high school age boys to learn how to fly and, handle aircraft to try to get them into the Air Force Academy or have careers in aviation. But, David Ferry was training, Lee Harvey Oswald and Barry Seal. These guys were all being trained by David Ferry for the Civil Air Patrol. So I feel like he's an important name because he kind of is in the mix. And then the other thing about him that's really, I think, important was that he was very close with George H.W. Bush, with Poppy Bush, and they worked together to create what was called Operation 40, which was what you just talked about. It was a special operations unit that was used for assassinations, and it was used for industrial espionage as well. And so he was one of the founders of the of Operation 40, which of course later goes on to become the JM Wave station in Miami, which is run by Ed Lansdale and William Harvey King, and then it turns into the Cuba Group, which is the the Operation Mongoose. It's the same, the same characters, and then again the same characters become the the plumbers for Watergate. So there's a lot of continuity between these people. So that's why Crichton, I think, is really important, because he's right in the middle, and he also. And I'm just kind of piling on, but the other major thing was that he was part of what was called the Empire's Trust. And the Empire Trust was a financial instrument that was heavily involved in General Dynamics, which is, of course, very important in Fort Worth. With Ivy Hale was the head of security, and then with Henry Crown as the head of General Dynamics. There's a lot of connections that, people that study the JFK assassination, I feel like he's a must name that has to be on the lists of people to, list of suspects.
Speaking of aircraft, one of the points that Fletcher Prouty makes is that the proposed, I think it's called the TFX fighter, which was the first plane that was designed for all the services to use at the same time, became a political issue, kind of a way for the Kennedys to get votes by contacting and being in the districts where people would benefit from the production of that plane. And the other side of that, I think, was these Texas folks that wanted to have it for themselves. The decisions as to who gets to build a national warplane or a Navy fleet are huge decisions, and people like him are definitely in the mix as to who gets what.
Definitely, and I mean, General Dynamics, checks the boxes also for the Navy, because they were Electric Boat too. That was the previous company to General Dynamics was Electric Boat. So they're involved in military aircraft, a lot of missile technology. I mean, I mentioned David Harold Bird. He had LTV, which was another major player in the aviation, and of course General Dynamics also acquired Consolidated Air, or Convair, which I've talked a lot about because they made the B-24s at Willow Run. One, Rosie the Riveter was cranking out one B-24 per hour in Ypsilanti, Michigan, and of course there was a reciprocal relationship with that Willow Run facility and the Fort Worth facility. It was also making B-24s, and that of course was where the F-111 was eventually ended up for General Dynamics.
Yeah, the F-111, a very interesting plane. One that supposedly was too heavy and didn't fly fast enough, but it was very, very popular. And my father's eventual boss, General Leroy Manor, was a flyer of the F-111 in Vietnam. Supposedly had a couple of hundred combat missions,
Hmm.
and so it's pretty. Uh, yeah, it's a small world. That's all I'm saying. Um, the the other thing that I wanted to touch on, since we were talking about Cuba, is these these Texans, and fronted by Jack Crichton, bought into these oil leases from Batista, and these all of these offshore oil leases uh, that were supposedly, they were going to develop, but then along comes Castro, and these guys are now going to lose. So how do they react when they see Castro's coming along?
Well, I mean, again, I think of the characters involved. I mean, I look at Zapata Oil, which was, started by, Poppy Bush, who's sort of the other half to Jack Crichton, and they're doing offshore drilling. I mean, that's something I always try to remember is that offshore oil plays was a new concept. I mean, it's still new at that point. I mean, they'd done the inland pipelines, and they'd done a lot of oil development in on the interior, but as far as being able to capture offshore oil, that was still a new concept, and I think that's where a lot of the trouble uh, with Cuba came in was over what you just mentioned, these oil leases that George de Morenscheld had worked. Bill Buckley's dad was very involved in that stuff as well. You mentioned Fletcher Prouty. Fletcher Prouty was he was the teacher at Yale of Poppy Bush and of William Buckley. Um, there are a lot of people that were in there at that time. There's also the Godfrey Rockefeller would have been at Yale at the same time. So he Prouty is somebody that I love listening to his talks, but I feel like there's a lot to read between the lines with him because to me he's a very complicated character. So it's interesting to follow him now, because the other connection that he had was, of course, he was the pilot for Chiang Kai-shek when he went to the Tehran conference, and he also his alibi for the JFK story was that he was flying, down to Antarctica, and the person that was, the big Antarctica explorer was Admiral Byrd, and Admiral Byrd was the cousin of David Harold Byrd, and he was also the best friend of Edsel Ford from up in Grosse Pointe, from where I'm from. So um, it's again, it's like you said, it's a small group of intriguing characters, and when I mentioned like a Henry Ford, this or Edsel Ford being his friend, his son is Henry Ford II, and um, Henry Ford II is the one that hired Robert McNamara with the Whiz Kids, and we're talking about negotiating these massive aviation contracts for all the branches of service, and Robert McNamara was the guy that's right in the middle of that negotiation.
Well, I'll always be grateful to Fletcher Prouty because in his book, The Secret Team, he devoted a number of pages to the organization called SACSA, which was the part of the Joint Chiefs of Staff that my dad worked for 10 years, right up to his death. And his ability to explain how that came to be opened up the door for me to start realizing, who my dad really was in the big scheme of things. And I tend to I agree with you that he leaves a lot out, and that you can read behind the between the lines, and he may have been involved in some things, but I do like the way that uh, he's been at the forefront of exposing the secret team, exposing what Alan Dulles was doing. And as far as what you called an alibi for the JFK, I mean, I don't think it's an alibi. I think he was sent to get him out of the way.
Hmm.
At least that's the way I read it. Of course, who knows? Who knows? But
Yeah,
I tend to give Fletcher Prouty the benefit of the doubt because his
I
story
love.
was really
I
consistent with my dad's life.
Well, like I said, I he's a great speaker, and I feel like he is a somebody that was a spy, so he's limited in what he can say, and yeah, but I just he is very helpful in, like you said, he explains a lot of he explains the focal point system that Alan Dulles set up, which
Yeah.
is incredibly helpful. I mean, he gives a lot of great information. I guess I'm just not, I don't have, it's just hard to to have a character be all hero, all hero, and they're all conflicted characters. I mean, they were all working for people, and so it's, they're winners and losers and in all these things. So it's just but I do it's just that he has some he just has some things that I feel like should be scrutinized, is all I'm saying.
All right. Well, he flew Chiang Kai-shek in World War II, right? And
Hmm.
that puts him in the context of things on the Chiang Kai-shek KMT side against the communists. And the communists, to me, are kind of now starting to be kind of agents of the British to me, especially in China when Mao comes in and they have this division of China. It seems to me a play to take China away from Chiang Kai-shek and his American allies, such as Fletcher Prouty, perhaps, or Joseph Stilwell, the general, or others who are allied going back through the American imperial expansion into the Pacific, into the Philippines, and other ways that that generally became in World War II the Southwest Pacific area that was uh, delineated for Douglas MacArthur to be kind of the grand poobah of, or the and so that reflects to me the Batista side versus the Castro side in Cuba, and these the you remember the book I read by Carl Oglesby, The Yankee and Cowboy War.
Hmm.
And so I see these two sides now again surfacing when when we look at Cuba at that time. And so these internal wars that keep going on inside of what I think is an overall effort to unify the world under a world government. And it's one side, this gang of elites against that gang of elites, but they have an agreement, it seems, amongst themselves that they're all going to try to consolidate everything into one big empire at the end of the day, a new world
Well,
order.
yeah, I mean, I think that the one of the things that I did today was I was looking at Dean Rusk, because you'd mentioned Otto Otepka, and like we want to drill down on what his role was, and that was something that I didn't know about Rusk, was that he was the assistant to Joseph Stilwell in the Burmese theater, and of course Stilwell was working with Chiang Kai-shek, and he was working under Louis Mountbatten, who was the British commander. So that there again, that you have communist China with Mao, maybe, being under the influence of the British, but you also have, Chiang Kai-shek, working with Louis Mountbatten, and then, Louis Mountbatten's wife Edwina, her dad is the founder of the German Anglo Fellowship, um, which includes, Hjalmar Schlecht and Montague Norman and the Cambridge Five spy ring, and um, that there's a lot of conflicted characters, and with Russ, the other thing that um, was he was the president of the Rockefeller Foundation, and starting I think in '52, and and again that's like one of the I just draw off these like random personal connections, but when he was the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, they bought this Bellagio property in Lake Como in Italy, and they've had, I mean, so many of their, you know, we're gonna make Seppi, like we're gonna do like all these different, relief programs. They do it at this Bellagio property in Lake Como that Dean Rusk acquired, and of course he bought it from the heiress of the Hiram Walker. She married a Turnus and Taxi, noble, but she grew up in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, and she's the granddaughter of Hiram Walker, the distiller in Detroit. So I'm always like, I don't know. So that was something I wanted to mention, because like I feel like Rusk is under Kennedy, when he brought him in as Secretary of State, they said he was kind of like the, I think, third choice, and that he was a weak, Secretary of State, and didn't really, I mean, maybe they were comparing him to John Foster Dulles, and he didn't, stack up as far as, running covert operations, but I don't know. I mean, I have to learn more about all of these characters, but I just wanted to mention that with Rusk, is that he did have this relationship with Stilwell, Chiang Kai-shek, um, Mountbatten, and then he goes to Rockefeller Foundation, where he's going to be, dealing with the brothers that we think of now, Nelson, David, Winthrop, the whole, Lawrence and John D. Jr. Like he's working directly with the Rockefeller brothers. So I don't know if it's correct to just take that at face value, that he was a weak Secretary of State. I mean, I feel like maybe he was, but he was a proxy for, very powerful interests. So I just wanted to mention that, because I know with the Otepka, we want to be careful about accurately, describing his role as far as doing these, uh, reviewing the personnel that was basically coming into America, and what was his, just be accurate on that, I guess.
Yeah, I've been working on it too. Put 4 or 5 references on my Twitter today, and a number of them come from what you might have thought of in the 50s as very right-wing writers, very right-wing publications. But if you read through the text of what they're saying, it all seems like it's come true, you know? The what sounded like crazy right-wing alarmism, that the Reds are invading, Well, Rockefellers were bringing the Reds in. Um, they were bringing them in, and they were putting them in the government, and that, to me, is uh, is important. And so these old voices in these old, fact sheet newspaper things are are worth looking at again. So I posted some of them up on my Twitter. It's very interesting because you know one of the deep things that really affects me is when we see Henry Kissinger saying that sovereignty has got to go. We've got to get rid of national sovereignty. And that was his mission, was to break down and intermingle everybody with everybody, and I think you consider all the migration that's been forced upon the world and into Europe and other places, but the now into the United States, of forcing everybody to become more or less equally poor,
Yeah.
to lower our standard of living and to raise the standard of living in the third world, so that you have some wealth in China, you have some wealth in Russia now, you have some wealth in all different places in the world that you would never have expected it, given the devastation of World War II. But that has been provided to them by the largesse of the financial elites in this country, who have gone out there with World Bank money and all kinds of funds to, Rockefeller, Ford Foundation, all of these grants. But the idea of shaping the world into a new world order, as opposed to bettering the the condition of the nation that you're working for. I mean, as Secretary of State, National Security Advisor, otherwise, the man's loyalty was never to the United States. It was always to this dream of a world order, and that's what I think we need to remember when you think about people who seriously take that oath when they join the military, or the government service generally, the the oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. And if you take that oath, and then you have a Henry Kissinger trying to change everything and make it, no, no, it's not about, the Constitution. That's just a bunch of old, racist guys that we don't care about anymore. Take all their statues down and forget about them, because we now have a much better idea. And it's, it's just leading everybody into this totalitarian uh, control grid that we speak about. And David Icke speaks about it, and so many of the famous uh, alternate, journalism has been talking about it for decades. But it sure does seem to me that that's where it's headed, and that's where we have a problem, because people who are loyal to their oath to the Constitution are going to have a problem when they see um, people coming in to our State Department and other places that clearly have different goals than preservation of our Constitution. So it's been, an internal struggle inside of this government. I think also in view of what you were pointed out about Louis Mountbatten, think about him representing the nobility, or the elites of Great Britain, and connected with the old money and the old empires. But then we have uh, this new world order, which is NATO, and the funds that are supporting NATO seem to be the same people that allowed the Soviet Union to expand. And you know, I mean, here we are in the 50s saying, the Soviet Union is the most evil empire that's ever existed in the world. We've got to do everything we can do to break down and stop the evil empire. But at the same time, we're doing more and more deals with them. George P. Schultz and Amtorg, and but then in the 50s and 60s, and this is what the Rockefellers are doing, is facilitating transfer of our technology to the Soviet Union. Why? Well, the only reason it makes sense is to equalize us and to make us then vulnerable to being, all of us, submitted to a one world authority.
Well, it's part of what happened with me personally was that grew up in Detroit, where there's a lot of history with Russia. Um, Goki was called Little Detroit, where they did the Gauze factory. And, as you mentioned, Amtorg, they negotiated with Henry Ford, and they had Albert Kahn go and industrialize Russia with the Stalin 5-year plan starting in 1927. So there's a lot of old collaboration within Detroit, and I did have the the anti-communist propaganda as a kid, but it was clownish. It was like Rocky it was Rocky 4, it was Rocky and Drago, and it wasn't I didn't have any of the memories of World War II or anything like that. I mean, I missed all that stuff. And then we had I was a huge hockey fan, and the Detroit Red Wings we had the Russian Five. We had the five, great Russian hockey players that came, and people loved them. And so there was never this like hatred, this just like hatred of the Russian people for me personally. So they were, because again, like those hockey players would talk about, growing up in Russia, and they were dirt poor, and communism had failed, and it was at the end of communism, and they came for the American dream, like a lot of immigrants do. So this whole framework it's hard for me to it's hard for me to get into this whole like understanding how like Western goals and Wackel and these groups that were so anti-communist groups. I mean, we're talking about Chiang Kai-shek, I mean, and the China hands and all of these, like you said, using Kissinger, directing us to use so much of our, gross domestic product to go towards defense because of this, threat with the communist threat. I mean, those were all real things that happened, but I just missed it. I was just born in a time where I didn't see that. So, as far as the world, the new world order, and I look at like Bilderbergs and trilateral groups, and those kind of organizations that were putting forward these economic and aid programs. So I do look at that stuff, but um, I guess as far as with Kissinger now, like I'm more curious about like who did he influence? Who is in his role now? Like who's going to fill that position going forward? So I don't know. I mean, I've talked about a lot of the personal things that I suspect happened in regards to Henry Kissinger or his group, and um so I'm not gonna ever you know support his policies, but at the same time, like I just feel like I was in a weird time for this stuff, because I just didn't grow up with that. I wasn't taught to duck under my desk at
Yeah.
school to avoid
Okay,
the atomic bomb.
you didn't hear better dead than red
I've
as you were
heard you
growing
say
up.
it, but that was not propaganda. I mean, it was literally Ivan Drago uses steroids and cheats and killed Apollo, and now Rocky has to go to Russia to win. That was like the my elementary school like introduction to like or watching the Olympics, and the Germans and the Russians, they cheat in the Olympics. Like that was my um personal experience with it.
And now, the whole election, uh, the last election, Trump's biggest sin was he was going to help the Ruskies, and the Ruskies helped him win the election. And the Ruskies are have now become the evil empire again. It's just like the '50s all over again, except for they're not calling them commies; they're just calling them Ruskies.
Yeah, and then and he's Oleg Deripaska lives on 63rd Street, where his kids grow up, and he's Bob Mueller as the FBI director is trying to get him to do secret missions to get Bob Levinson off of Kish Island, and Deripaska is coming to Detroit to buy assets during the auto bailout. So, and he also is the person that takes over Glencore, which was Mark Rich's business. So yeah, there's a lot of problematic elements to it. I mean, I don't put I put Trump. I mean, I put Trump as somebody that's in the group with Kissinger's group. I mean, just based on the Resorts International, the partners of Resorts International were like Alan Dulles and Thomas Dewey and Edmund de Rothschild, um, Meyer Lansky, who was working with Roy Cohn, his mentor. So I just see him as the front guy of that group. And I mean, I know, like, I do these calls on Monday, and at the very end, everybody just wanted the John Trump, has all the secrets, and he has all the Tesla secrets and all this stuff. And I'm just not into that story. I just don't, I look at, he worked for, he was with Carl Compton, who was the president of MIT. He was working for Alfred Lee Loomis, who created the Rad Lab. So I just look at those guys. I mean, he's working with Vannevar Bush. So I just don't see him as a secret good character that's going to come out of the woodwork and, give us all of these Tesla secrets. I just think that's, I don't know. I've never, I want to believe, I want to give people a chance, but I feel like he's had a lot of chances where he could have said stuff and he never did.
Yeah, that's true. But we have a limited field to choose from. I
Yeah.
mean, what do you? For me, I think sometimes that at least he speaks right in terms of sovereignty, in terms of preserving individual rights, but that doesn't mean that he's going um, to be any different from a Henry Kissinger's
I mean,
appointee, whoever
he's
it
got
might be.
he has Alina Habba as his lawyer right now. That's supposedly Matt Pottinger's, girlfriend or whatever. And, he's Matt Pottinger is, maybe gets my first place vote for the replacement for Henry Kissinger. He was in the Mac Bundy role during Bay of Pigs. He was, deputy national security advisor. So I don't know. You look at Stan Pottinger's role with, during Iran Contra, and his relationship with Kissinger and Bush, and it to me looks like the same characters are slotted in there.
And you mentioned Deripaska, and you know, of course, everybody thinks of Kolomoisky and the others.
Yeah.
The oligarchs or the moguls of today. How do they fit into the overall plan? Because it seems to me that a lot of what's going on is trying to create oligarchs, trying to create little empires here and there that perhaps in some future time they're going to call on you and say, okay, now you've had your fun. Now you turn everything over to us. But these oligarchs are seemingly accepted in a lot of ways. So, oh, he's an oligarch. Well, okay. What do you think about the role of the oligarchs in the planning of a Henry Kissinger?
Well, I think that it's. I mean, I look at his role at Harvard being a big factor. He started he did the international seminars, and he founded with Robert Bowie, who was the deputy of John McCloy. They started I think was it Institute for, it's an international school at Harvard. It's now called Weatherstone Institute. But from that Weatherstone, um, when Kissinger went into government, they created something called the HIID, the Harvard Institute for International Development, and that was started originally with a Chicago boy, with somebody that had worked with Milton Friedman at University of Chicago, and then of course Jeffrey Sachs, who maybe is my number one person to as the replacement for Kissinger. He was the architect with Larry Summers in the reconstruction of Russia. So when you talk about Oleg Deripaska, his I think he either married either it was like his mom was married to somebody with Yeltsin, but he had a familial and and when they were when the HIID came in, they implemented the shock therapy, shock economics that was, Kissinger had used in, Central America during Operation Condor. Um, they just rebranded it. They moved it from University of Chicago, they moved it to Harvard, and then, they created the same system where they nationalized the industries in Russia. Then they did private auctions to people that could buy it. The people that had the assets to buy them became the oligarchs. People like Oleg Deripaska, Roman Abramoff, and you can go through the list. But that was the system that, it's called loans. It was called loans for shares. And these, Oleg Deripaska, his best friend is supposed to be, Nat Rothschild, who's the son of Jacob, the grandson of Victor, who was running the Cambridge Five. So, I mean, it's the same network of people. Um, and so that's why, as far as the oligarchs, like, I don't know. I honestly don't know because, like, I have met, people that are like whatever billionaire class people from, you know, growing up or whatever. And I honestly can't, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I mean, I think they pick people that in many ways are, if they don't have the public ability to communicate, they, are more of the numbers people or, strategy and negotiation. But I don't know. The oligarch class is just I think they just create them as a way to distract you from the older networks like you talked about, the old banking networks. And like I had a person that blocked me on Twitter when he asked me, he's like, well, you said that Meyer Lansky is the head of this the head of the Jewish mafia. Like, what do you, why do you say that? And I said, well, the first thing I do is I'd look at what did William Wiseman do, who was his network, and then who was Max Warburg, that he worked with. And like, I feel like those names are left out as far as being the seeds of a lot of these intelligence networks that I feel like Kissinger became. He took a leadership role in that system. And as we've said, one thing that you mentioned the other day was about with Harley. You talked about this incident that your dad had told you about when he was playing football at Harvard and he got benched his senior year because he wouldn't break a guy's leg. And you may not remember this, but we talked about that, and that was that happened to one of my classmates' grandpas who became he became an NFL football player, and he did that when he was at University of Michigan. He broke the guy's leg to get the role. And when you talk about, well, what were the ramifications? My friend came to my high school in 5th grade because both his parents had been killed in a car accident, and he was actually raised by this man who was the gentlest giant you ever knew. So I mean, it's so there's a lot of things that, like, when you say things like that I relate to, because you hear these stories. And of course he was a national champion at Michigan. He won world championships when the Lions were good in the 50s. He was on those teams. But I do think that they as you suggested, I think they do test people, and it makes it very hard because when your personal relationship with them is they're so generous and nice, and you just don't get that sense that there's that mean streak in them at all. But you just don't, you don't know.
Well, thanks for sharing about your friend. I think you and I had this discussion a few months back, maybe a year or so ago. And I'm not absolutely certain that that is exactly what happened with my dad, because I got it secondhand from my mother. But he refused to do something, and I think it had to do with breaking a leg.
Yeah.
So, and then, another thing that brings up just in connection with my dad is J. Edgar Hoover. And that I've just read recently that J. Edgar Hoover would start a file on everybody, anybody that showed up on the radar screen. And he would want to know, what their education was, what their career was, um, who their family was, and whether or not they played football. And I think that's significant because maybe he knew that when somebody went through the football, the college football thing, that the coaches there were there to kind of help pick out people that would be useful, doing special operations, quote unquote. So that's interesting. But again,
But
our world right now seems to be getting so intermingled that we're going to lose our identity as losing our family identities, losing our identities as nations, and losing our abilities to affect policy as the sovereignty of our country gets drained away in favor of this apparently benign United Nations idea that is so easily misused by the powers that be, the old powers that have. That's one of the themes that we have, and you mentioned it yourself, is that the old money of the past didn't disappear, and it's still the old families, the famous 12 or so families, the Italians and the black nobility, and all of the, the money of the British East India Company, that all of that stuff is still there, and is so much money that you know as Mark Kulak often says, they have far more money than they need. They don't need money. What they want is something else. Is it our data? Is it control over our bodies? Is it to get us all chipped and traceable? But whatever they want, they've got plenty of money already, and that's a factor that a lot of people don't even take into consideration because they're so good at putting on this puppet show on the news every night that people, say, accept it. That's the way it is tonight. So that was
well,
my Walter Cronkite
yeah.
imitation.
Well, I was going to say too that with the football theme though, we did. Gerald Ford was a University of Michigan football star before he was a football coach at, I believe, for the Yale Bulldogs when he was in law school.
Yeah, I'm sure he was a real nice guy.
I saw him one time when I was in first grade. We did a trip to California, and he went through we were going into the Beverly Hills Hotel, and he came out the door, and my dad said "Go Blue" to him, and I didn't know who he was, and that was the only time I ever saw good old Jerry Ford from Grand Rapids, Michigan. But as far as the saving sovereignty, and I again, like, I just look at, like, like my one of my neighbors has been my mom's friend forever, and she's so upset because they're gonna do this project where they cut down all these trees and they're gonna build curbs and sidewalks. That
Oh no.
she went to the meeting, and there are like 80 people there. 79 of them said, we don't want to do it, we want to keep the trees, we don't want to do it. They don't listen. They don't care. They've already decided that they're going to do it. So I feel like even with
Mm.
stuff as simple as just like putting in curbs, it's very hard and it's frustrating to get in the process. So I don't know what to say. I mean, on a global scale, and as far as like international trade deals and stuff, I don't have a good answer for it because I do, I feel like there's a lot of it's I don't know. It's just hard. It's hard to. I mean, I feel like with the part of what I think that the Kissinger legacy is that um he demoralized, he's effectively demoralizes people, and takes the fight out of them. And that's, we say that we can't, but when your real life experience is that it is frustrating. It's hard, but you got to keep. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. It's been a lot. There's just a lot of there's been a lot that's gone into it. Is all I can. I don't know, as far as this planning and demoralization. And it's sad that it's so effective, but it is effective strategy.
Yeah, wow. I'm so sorry about the trees and
Yeah,
these
I
these
hate.
crazy ideas. They need to have the 5G and the 10G and the 40G, and what for? It's surveillance. It's control grid. It's horrible, and people you can't even make that argument because they'll say you're crazy. That sounds absurd. It's just to improve our reception in case of emergencies. Oh, I don't know. We keep talking about it, and people are waking up, I think. I don't know if it's anywhere near fast enough, but we do our part, David. Thank you so much for being with me tonight.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, thanks for being with me, and I'll see you tomorrow at 11 a.m. for our weekly chat. I hope you can join us then. And oh boy, I don't know if YouTube's going to boot me or not. They sent me another nastygram today. There's something wrong with my content, and we have to protect our community or something nonsense. So anyway, I may disappear from YouTube at any moment. So please make sure and subscribe at our Rumble channel to keep up with McDuff Lives. Thanks, everybody. Thank you again, David.
Good night.